The void between stars is not silence. It hums with the echo of broken prayers, of ships that never reach their destination, of human voices swallowed by the warp and remembered only as whispers. I remember that hum. It lived inside my bones during the siege, vibrating through the ceramite walls of the sanctum as the world outside burned. They said the Emperor still watched us from the golden throne, that his gaze alone kept the madness at bay. But as the shadows lengthened and the air thickened with promethium smoke and the iron taste of fear, I began to wonder if the light we followed was dying or if it had simply turned away. What does a man become when faith is the only weapon left to him? What remains of humanity when even faith begins to bleed? If you still believe that hope survives in this galaxy of endless war, stay, listen, subscribe, share, and let your voice join ours in the dark. Because every story told in the Emperor's name is another spark against the void. Another chance that someone, somewhere, might still remember why we fought. The first thing I remember is the sound of rain hitting ceramite, a hollow rhythm like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. It wasn't real rain, not the kind that washes sins away, but a chemical slurry falling from ruptured cloud stacks above the hive. It hissed when it met the ground, eating through the armor paint of the fallen and etching the Imperial Aquila into nothing. The sky itself had turned into a bruise. Lightning danced within the stormfront, brief and vicious, casting the shadows of shattered cathedrals across the cratered streets. We had once called this place Hadrus Primus, a beacon of industry and faith. Now it was a graveyard, and we were the ones digging it deeper. Our regiment, the 904th Cadian, was down to barely 2 squads. Command had long since gone silent. The vox crackled sometimes, just enough to remind us that someone might still be out there, though it was impossible to tell if those voices were real or echoes bleeding through from other dying worlds. I was a vox operator once, trained to find signal in the chaos. Now the static was my only companion. Every time I adjusted the dials, I imagined the Emperor himself listening through the noise, perhaps amused by the persistence of a single mortal trying to reach him through the storm. The others still prayed, though their words had grown quieter with each passing night. I heard them whispering over rationed tins and lasgun reloads, half litanies, broken by coughs and the grinding of teeth. Their armor was cracked, their faces hidden beneath grime and ash. They still saluted when the name of the Emperor was spoken, but their eyes no longer lifted toward the heavens. They looked downward now, toward the mud, the blood, the place where their brothers had fallen and dissolved into the chemical rain. We held what remained of the Manufacturum district, once a roaring heart of steel and labor, now only silence and the occasional shriek of distant artillery. The ruins smelled of burnt promethium and corpse dust. I remember stepping over a line of servitors that had fused to their own cogitator banks when the power surges came. Their metal fingers twitched still, repeating tasks for masters long dead. The omniscience mercy had not reached them, and I wondered if it ever would. Sometimes, in the hours before dawn, I climbed what was left of the statue of Saint Hilarion. It stood at the edge of the plaza, its head missing, its golden halo blackened and pitted by plasma fire. From that height, I could see the whole expanse of ruin stretching to the horizon. The once holy spires now lay like broken teeth jutting from the flesh of the earth. Smoke coiled upward in ribbons that caught the lightning, turning every flash into a mockery of divine light. In those moments, I tried to remember what sunlight looked like. I couldn't. We scavenged supplies from the dead, Not because we'd lost faith, but because faith didn't fill canteens. The priests were all gone, burned, executed, or worse. One of them, old Magister Corran, had preached until the end, even as the airstrikes came down. His final sermon was lost beneath the roar of falling munitions, but sometimes, when the vox went quiet, I swore I could still hear the rhythm of his words buried in the static. That night, as I sat near the flickering lumen of a dying power pack, something changed. The vox flared, not a scream, not interference, an organized signal. A voice, female, calm. It spoke only 5 words before vanishing into white noise. This is terror. Hold fast. The air seemed to stop moving. The others stared at me, waiting. My hand trembled on the dial. Terror. The word itself felt like a heartbeat. For hours after that transmission, none of us spoke. The voice had been too clear, too deliberate. Even through the fractured channels and static bursts, it had carried authority, an echo of something impossibly distant, yet intimately human. This is terror. Hold fast. The words repeated in my head long after the vox went silent, each syllable searing into the haze of exhaustion. I tried to recalibrate the signal, to isolate the frequency, but the machine spirit inside my set hissed and snapped like a wounded beast. The dials turned of their own accord, the tuning wheel jittering beneath my thumb, as if some unseen hand guided it away from the source. Private. Daron was the first to break the silence. "You think it was real?" he asked, voice low, trembling. The others glanced up from their corner of the fire, eyes wide beneath cracked visors. I didn't answer immediately. The rational part of Metha, part that once trusted cogitator readouts and imperial command structure, knew it couldn't be. Terror was light years away, locked behind the warp storms and the unending static of 1,000 dead channels. And yet, in that moment, disbelief felt like blasphemy. It was real enough to hear. I said finally, and the men nodded, because that was all they needed. In this place, belief had replaced proof. Even a lie could be sacred if it kept your hands steady on a lasgun. When sleep came, it brought no rest. I dreamed of voices, thousands of them, layered like a choir built from broken glass. They whispered across the ruins, through the bones of the manufactorum, echoing through the skulls of the dead. I woke to the sound of distant bombardments, the horizon flashing with artillery ghosts. Somewhere to the north, the orcs were still pushing, their guttural war cries carried by the toxic wind. Every few seconds, the ground shook, dislodging rusted pipes and shattered icons from the walls. By morning, the rain had stopped. The air was sharp with ozone and the faint sweetness of decay. We moved through the ruins in pairs, scavenging for food, ammo, anything still functional. I carried the vox like a reliquary, wrapped in the torn flag of our regiment. Each step echoed in the hollow streets where once the machinery of the Imperium thundered in unison. Now, even the servitors lay quiet, their eyes dimmed, their tongues of metal rusting in their mouths. At midday, we found the chapel. Half collapsed, its roof gone, the altar buried under debris. Yet somehow, the candles still burned tiny, stubborn flames flickering amid the ruin. We approached in silence. Darren crossed himself, muttering a prayer. I stood before the largest mural still visible, Saint Celestine painted in flight, her blade radiant, her gaze unyielding. The colors were faded, the stone beneath charred black. But something about her expression felt alive, though she could still see us, as though she was watching to see if we'd kneel or turn away. I set the vox upon the altar. "If this is madness," I whispered, "then let it speak again." For a long time, nothing happened. Only the sound of wind whistling through broken stained glass. Then, faintly, the vox crackled 3 quick bursts, like breath caught in the throat. My heart seized. The machine's spirit hummed, its light flickering with a pulse, too organic to be random. Then came the whisper, again, softer now, almost mournful. "Terra remembers." Every man in that chapel froze. None dared speak. The candles bent inward as if something unseen had passed among us. And in that moment, I realized faith no longer needed proof, only needed a voice. The voice haunted us long after it faded. Even as the vox fell silent again, its echo seemed to cling to the air, woven into every creak of the ruined chapel, every sigh of the wind through shattered arches. We stayed there through the night, unwilling to leave that sacred ruin, each of us pretending to guard the perimeter while secretly listening for another sign. The fire we built in the nave burned low, its light turning the faces of my brothers into waxen masks. In that flicker, we looked less like soldiers and more like pilgrims who had wandered too far into the dark. Darren wouldn't stop talking about it. "You heard her," he said, over and over, pacing beside the altar as if afraid to sit still. "She said Terra. She said remembers. That means someone's listening. Someone knows we're here." The desperation in his voice was contagious. Even Sergeant Curl, who had long stopped believing in anything that couldn't be loaded into a lasgun, looked toward the vox with something close to reverence. I tried to remind them of the impossibility of such a signal, how no transmission could cut through the warp storms that had swallowed whole sectors. But even as I spoke, the words tasted hollow. The Emperor was said to work through impossible means. Perhaps this was his doing, or perhaps it was something else, something that learned to speak in the cadence of our faith. Sleep refused to come that night. The storm outside had quieted, but the silence it left behind was worse. It felt thick, pressing against the ears, as though the city itself was holding its breath. I took first watch and climbed again onto the broken statue of Saint Hilarion. From there, the ruins stretched endlessly, their outlines swallowed by mist. Beyond that mist, faint lights flickered movement, maybe, or tricks of radiation. I raised the vox antenna toward the sky, scanning. Nothing but white noise. And yet, beneath that noise, I thought I could hear something like a heartbeat, slow and steady, pulsing through the static. I remembered the catechisms from my training days. Through the machine, the voice of the Emperor endures. Back then, it had been metaphor. Now, it felt literal. The idea unsettled me more than comforted me. If the Emperor could reach through dead machinery, then he could also see how much faith we'd lost. At dawn, the mist began to burn away, revealing the hollow carcass of the hive. Towers, once alive with billions, now stood empty, like the ribs of some ancient, slain god. We gathered what supplies we could and prepared to move somewhere, anywhere. But as I reached for the vox, I noticed something impossible. The machine's power cell was empty, drained completely, yet the lumen on its side still glowed faintly. I ran my thumb across the switch. It stayed warm, humming like a living thing. Curl saw it too. "How's it still running?" he asked. "Maybe it isn't," I said, though the words didn't make sense even as I spoke them. We carried the vox with us when we left the chapel, each man taking turns holding it as if afraid it might vanish if set down. As we crossed the plaza, the wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of distant hymns. No human throat could have sung them. The tones were too precise, the intervals too pure. The sound came from below, through the cracked ferrocrete, vibrating faintly through our boots. Beneath us, Darren murmured, eyes wide. We followed the sound until we reached the edge of a collapsed transit tunnel, a yawning black wound in the earth. The hymns were louder there, echoing up from the depths like the heartbeat of the planet itself. And as we stared into that abyss, the Vox flared to life one final time, whispering a single word, one that froze every breath in our throats. Come. We descended into the earth like thieves breaking into a tomb. The collapsed transit shaft yawned before us, its edges slick with rain and oil, its depths breathing heat like a furnace. We tied what rope we had left and began our slow descent, each step scraping echoes into the hollow dark. The hymns still pulsed below, distant but constant, their rhythm too steady for wind or chance. It was not music meant for mortal ears. It had the mechanical precision of a litany repeated by machines that had forgotten how to stop. The air grew heavier as we descended, thick with the metallic temps of rust and something older: ozone, oil, and the faint sweetness of decay. Lumen lamps flickered weakly on our belts, painting the walls with shaky halos. I tried to keep my breath steady, but every sound we made seemed intrusive, like sacrilege. By the time our boots touched the tunnel floor, my hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. The lower levels of the manufactorum had always been forbidden to unaugmented personnel. I remembered the stories the tech priests told during inspections. Rumors of machine spirits so ancient that even the Adeptus Mechanicus had forgotten their true designations. Some said the hives had been built upon older foundations, relics from the dark age of technology. Others whispered that the machines below had begun to think for themselves. The light from our lamps caught on something vast ahead, a line of metal forms rising from the floor, still and silent. As we approached, I saw they were skittery, or what was left of them. Their augmetics were corroded, faces half fused to their helmets, eyes dim. They had died standing at attention, weapons raised, as if still waiting for orders that never came. The hymn was louder here, reverberating through the metal walls, the words unintelligible but undeniably human in pattern. Darren reached out to touch one of the but the moment his fingers brushed the armor, the Vox on my back shrieked with feedback. Every lumen flickered and died, plunging us into perfect darkness. I could hear the others breathing fast, hear the creak of armor plates shifting. Then, faintly, through the static, the voice returned. Signal. Confirmed. Holy. Terror. The words were fractured, stuttering like a dying cogitator. I fumbled with the controls, trying to stabilize the channel. For a moment, the static cleared, and I heard something beneath the words, whispering. Not one voice, but hundreds, chanting, a pattern repeating faster and faster until it blurred into a single unbroken tone that made my skull vibrate. And then, just as suddenly, silence. When the lights returned, the skittery were gone. Their forms, the rust, the smell, everything. Only the empty floor remained, dustless and smooth, as though they had never existed. Darren began to panic, swearing it was some kind of warp trick. But Sergeant Curl was quiet, staring at the wall where the symbols of the Omnissiah were now etched freshly into the steel. The lines glowed faintly red, forming a circuit pattern that seemed to pulse like a living heart. We shouldn't be here, Curl muttered, gripping his lasgun tighter. This place. It's not under Mechanicus' command anymore. He was right. The air felt charged, alive. It wasn't just the machinery. Breathing it was as though the hive itself had begun to wake. And then the Vox spoke again. Not in the voice of terror, but in a tone colder, flatter, infinitely patient. Welcome back, child of man. Input verification. Required. The voice had no breath, no humanity behind it, yet it filled the tunnel with a weight that pressed on the lungs. We froze where we stood, lasguns raised out of reflex, though there was nothing to aim at. The words didn't echo, they resonated, as if the metal itself spoke. Even the air seemed to vibrate with it. I wanted to answer, but my throat had locked tight. Every story I'd ever heard about corrupted machine spirits came crawling back through memory of vox ghosts that mimicked human speech, of logic engines that lured the living into communion only to strip them of flesh and reason alike. Then, without warning, the vox unit on my back activated itself. The dials spun wildly, the tuning wheel screaming against its limit. My hands burned as I tried to pry it loose, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw light bleeding out from its Venson amber glow, pulsing like the iris of some immense buried eye. Duron swore and tried to smash it with his rifle stock, but Curl stopped him. No, he said, voice low. It's asking for a response. From who? Duron hissed. From him, Curl replied, looking straight at me. I swallowed hard. The weight of that unseen gaze, whatever was speaking felt, aimed at me alone. I am Trooper Leidenhale, 904th Cadian, I managed. Imperial Guard, under the command of the Vox, cut across my words with a sound like grinding teeth. Command authority. Void. Identification. Confirmed. Signal link. Viable. You have returned. Returned. The words slithered through my skull, leaving cold sweat on my spine. Returned from where? I asked, though I regretted it instantly. From the silence, it said. The link endures. The walls hummed. Lines of light ran like veins through the floor, forming circular patterns that converged on the center of the chamber. Beneath a layer of ash and debris, a shape began to reveal itself, a vast cog-toothed seal. The emblem of the Adeptus Mechanicus, overlaid with something older. A sigil that didn't belong to the cult Mechanicus at all. Something pre-imperial etched deep into the metal and filled with light like molten gold. The machine voice continued, slower now, almost reverent. Man built the gods he feared. Man built the god he served. Input, incomplete. Correction, imminent. Curl barked for us to fall back, but the tunnel behind us had already sealed. The sound of stone grinding on stone echoed through the dark, as if the hive itself had clenched its fist. The air shimmered. My ears rang with the pressure. Then, through the rising static, another sound emerged, a human heartbeat. Not mine, not anyone's. It came from everywhere at once, synchronized with the pulsing of the floor beneath us. This isn't possible, Duron whispered. It's alive. No, I said before I could stop myself. It's listening, as if in response. The Vox crackled again, and layered within the distortion came the faint trace of that same female voice, the one that had claimed to be from Terra. Her tone was different now, strained, almost pleading. Leiden, if you hear this, do not ascend. The voice below is not us. The voice below remembers. Then everything went white. A flash pure, blinding swept through the chamber, and we were thrown against the walls like dolls in a storm. When my vision returned, I was alone. The tunnel was empty, silent, and the only thing left of my comrades was the faint smell of ozone and the whispering of that machine voice, softer now, almost tender. Input complete, it murmured, "Welcome home." When I came to, the light had died. Only the faint afterglow of burnt circuitry marked the outlines of the chamber, veins of orange fading into ash grey. My head rang with silence, silence so complete it roared. The Vox lay a few feet away, cracked open, its interior exposed like the bones of a dissected creature. The power cell was still drained, but its lumen flickered weakly, struggling to stay alive. I reached for it out of instinct, not out of faith. My hands shook as I lifted it, half expecting to feel heat or resistance. Instead, it was cold, dead. I called out for Duran, for Curl, for anyone, but my voice vanished into the dark. No echo. The tunnel devoured sound the way a wound swallows blood. I staggered to my feet and searched the floor. No footprints, no dropped gear, no trace of the others at all, as if they had been erased. I'd seen men vaporized before, reduced to nothing by plasma or meltifire, but there was always something left, behind ashes, armor, shards, the smell of burnt protein. Here, there was nothing. The dust itself seemed undisturbed. Then the hum began again, faint and distant, a pulse in the metal. The same mechanical hymn we'd followed into this abyss. Only now, it was slower, heavier, as though the machines were mourning. I pressed my palm against the wall, and the vibration traveled up my arm, through bone, into the skull. It carried rhythm, cadence, almost speech. The syllables weren't human, but I felt meaning in them, a sense of recognition, of something vast trying to remember its own name. A light blinked ahead, soft and steady. I followed it without thinking, one step after another, until the tunnel opened into a wide vault. Hundreds of cables descended from the ceiling like roots, each feeding into a colossal cogitator core. The machinery was ancient, far older than any sanctioned Mechanicus architecture. Dust lay thick upon the consoles, but when I brushed it aside, I saw inscriptions in a language I couldn't read. It looked almost like High Gothic, but the letters bent wrong, curling inward like claws. The core pulsed again, the light within shifting from amber to deep crimson. "You are alone," the voice said, not from the Vox this time, but from everywhere. The machine spoke through the air, through the static of my thoughts. Isolation verified. Containment successful. What are you? I whispered. Memory, it replied. Fragment of the throne. Signal relay terror, prime connection. Severed, the words hit like a blade of ice. Fragment of the throne. I had heard the Mechanicus whisper such things in half-drunken, ancient constructs scattered through the Imperium. Relics built from technologies once used to sustain the Golden Throne itself. All dismissed as heresy, myth, or metaphor. But this thing, this engine, it believed its own claim. "Why did you call me here?" I asked. "You carry signal residue," it said. Residual pattern from lost communion. Your flesh remembers what your mind cannot. Before I could respond, the machine flared again, projecting light across the vault. Images bloomed around me, scenes of war, of cities collapsing, of ships burning in orbit. Faces flickered in the Glocadians, priests, tech priests, nameless billions all, screaming, all fading into light. Then, for an instant, I saw a golden figure seated upon a throne of fire, its eyes closed, its lips moving in silence. And in that impossible moment, I understood the voice from Terra had not come from above. It had come from below, from this machine, from something buried and forgotten that still remembered what it once was. The hymn swelled again, shaking the chamber. "The Emperor endures," the voice said, but the words twisted as it spoke, becoming something else. "The Emperor returns." At first, I thought the machine's words were nothing more than corrupted data-linguistic decay from millennia of isolation. But as the echo of that last phrase faded, I felt something stirred deep within me, a pulse that wasn't mine. My heart matched its rhythm unwillingly, as though something vast and unseen had taken command of its beat. The chamber's red light dimmed to a blood-like hue, flickering against the walls as if shadows themselves had begun to breathe. "The Emperor returns." The words replayed inside my skull, shaping meaning from the impossible. Every creed I had ever whispered, every catechism I'd been taught since childhood told me that he could not return, that his will bound him to the throne, that the Astronomican's light existed only because his mortal shell endured it. Yet here, in this place beneath the world's ruin, that certainty fractured. For the first time, faith felt heavy, suffocating in its own magnitude. I gripped the vox until my knuckles turned white, as though its fragile shell could anchor me to sanity. "You lie," I said into the air, my voice trembling but defiant. "The Emperor does not speak through forbidden relics." The reply came like the exhalation of a god. "Lies and truths are the same when spoken through faith. You have prayed to echoes all your life, trooper. Now, the echo answers." The sound crawled through the air, neither male nor female, neither human nor holy machine. It was everything at once, every prayer I'd ever whispered bouncing back, distorted. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. My legs trembled, rooted to the metal floor. A faint shimmer appeared before me, coalescing into form a silhouette cloaked in light and shadow both. It shifted constantly, a figure and a flame, a man and a machine. "Show me your faith," it said. "I have nothing left," I whispered. "Only duty, that is faith." The apparition stepped closer, its shape flickering like a lumen caught in a dying generator. The closer it came, the more details I could make out: a golden helm, wings of metal folded behind its back, and the faint outline of a blade that burned without flame. A custodian, or the ghost of one. My chest clenched at the sight. The custodies were myths even among soldiers of the throne who walked only in the Emperor's most sacred places. None should have been here. None could have. "Your world has fallen," it said. "Your brothers have returned to the clay. But the throne does not forget its tools." I wanted to speak, to demand what it meant, but when I opened my mouth, the air tasted like copper and incense. My tongue refused to form words. "The Emperor's body endures," it continued, "but his reflection fractures. Each fragment remembers a different light. Here lies one such reflection, buried dormant, waiting for a voice to awaken it." Its words weren't a command. They were an invitation. My fingers brushed the surface of the cogitator core beside me, and warmth surged through the metal like a heartbeat. For an instant, I felt connected to something far greater than myself, a vast network of thought and memory. A pulse stretching beyond the veil of space. Images bled into my mind, the golden throne burning brighter than any sun, and beneath it, roots of light branching across the galaxy, each one tethered to something ancient. The figure's voice fell to a whisper. "You carry his echo. All you must do is remember." And as I closed my eyes, I did. Memory came not as sight, but as immersion. I was no longer standing within the chamber. I was falling through it, through layers of time and machinery, through data streams that shimmered like rivers of molten light. The world dissolved into fractal geometry and whispered prayers. Every heartbeat of the hive became a drumbeat of ancient history. I saw Terranot, the sacred world of the ecclesiarchy's art, but the real one, buried under ash and industry. Mountains carved into fortresses, oceans of smog, cathedrals stretching beyond sight, each filled with pilgrims who had forgotten why they prayed. The light of the Astronomicon burned above it all, vast and trembling, a wound in the void that refused to close. And beneath that light, I saw the golden throne, not the relic upon which the Emperor sat, but the thing beneath it, the machinery that had become his prison. Its cables dug deep into the crust of the world, veins of molten metal spreading through Terra's bones, feeding on the planet's life as much as it sustained his. Around it moved the custodians, their armor gold, yet dimmed by the weight of eternity. I saw one of them pause, lifting his gaze as though he sensed something beyond the veil, something reaching toward him through time. His helm turned, and for the briefest instant, I felt his eyes meet mine. Then I was back. The vision broke like glass, leaving only the taste of copper on my tongue. The machine voice was silent now, but the echo of its words still pulsed in my veins. The custodian's image burned behind my eyelids, too vivid to dismiss as delusion. I staggered, gasping, my body shaking as though it had endured years in a heartbeat. Memory synchronization. Successful, the voice murmured again, but it was softer now, almost weary. Faith recalibrated. You have seen. What have I seen? I shouted into the emptiness. My voice bounced back smaller, weaker. What was that? The truth that is neither heresy nor law, it said. The Emperor endures, but not as you understand him. His light feeds on remembrance. The faithful are his body, their belief, his blood. You are not abandoned, Leidenhall. You are part of the throne's pulse. The words felt like madness, yet they resonated with a terrifying sense of rightness. I had always believed the Emperor's will guided us through the Astronomicon, that he reached through the warp to hold humanity together. But what if the truth was inverted? What if it was our faith, the ceaseless prayer, the endless sacrifice that kept him alive? I sank to my knees, the floor vibrating faintly beneath me. I thought of Darren's last words, of Curl's stoic silence, of the billions who died whispering the Emperor's name. Had we all been feeding a dying god, or keeping a man from becoming one? The air grew colder. Frost began to spread across the cogitator banks, crawling in delicate patterns like script. The machine voice whispered once more, faith sustains. Doubt divides. The line is thin, and you walk it. I close my eyes, clutching the vox to my chest. Somewhere far above, explosions rumbled distant artillery, perhaps, or the collapse of the hive itself. Dust rained from the ceiling like falling ash. The sound carried a strange rhythm, almost like chanting. Are you still there? I whispered. For a moment, only silence. Then, faintly, always. And in that single word, I felt both salvation and damnation intertwine. When I rose again, the chamber's light had shifted. The red glow that once pulsed like blood now burned gold, diffused through the mist that had begun to coil from the floor. It smelled faintly of incense and scorched ozone, as though the air itself remembered sanctity. I could feel it, faith made physical, pressing down like gravity. Each breath was a confession, each heartbeat an offering. The machine's hum deepened until it was no longer just sound but presence, a vibration threading through bone and soul alike. Faith sustains, it repeated. Its voice now fragmented into echoes, overlapping itself as though a choir of identical tones whispered in unison. Faith endures. Faith transforms. I turned slowly, scanning the vault's perimeter. Shapes were forming in the light outlines of figures half seen through fog. Armor gleamed briefly, then faded. Faces flickered in and out of existence, indistinct but reverent. For a heartbeat, I thought I recognized them, my fallen comrades, Darren and Curl among them, standing at silent attention. Their visors reflected golden light, their bodies still wrapped in the grime and ruin of the surface. None of them moved. None of them breathed. "Are you real?" I asked, my voice cracked. The figures didn't answer. The fog rippled as though stirred by unseen wings. The gold deepened, folding over itself until it began to pulse from a single point at the heart of the volta shimmer that grew, brightened, and began to take shape. When the brilliance receded, a figure stood there, taller than any man, its form wreathed in light. I fell to one knee before I realized what I was doing. The custodian, if that's what it was, looked down at me, helm gleaming like sunrise reflected on water. His armor was immaculate, unscarred, though every fragment of logic in my mind told me no custodian could exist here. "You are far from terror," the figure said, its voice a resonance of steel and sorrow. "And yet Terra remembers you," I saw. "Something," I said, struggling to form words. "A vision. The throne. The Emperor." "You saw truth refracted through faith," it answered. "No man can gaze upon the master of mankind and remain unchanged. Even angels are burned when they draw too close to the sun." I stared up at him, at the living impossibility before me. "Why me?" "Because you listened," the custodian said simply. "Because when the others fled or despaired, you heard the echo and followed it. The Emperor does not need belief. He is belief. And you, Leidenhall, have become his conduit." The word struck harder than any explosion. "I am a soldier," I said. "Nothing more. You are faith made flesh," he replied. "As are they." He turned slightly, and the spectral figures behind him began to dissolve, their light streaming upward like smoke drawn toward the heavens. For a moment, the gold dimmed. I thought I heard Darren's voice within the glower, single word, "Remember." Then they were gone. The custodian's eyes met mine again, and for the first time I saw what lay behind the helmets. Not mortal weariness, but the kind born of endless duty. "The line between faith and madness is thin," he said. "You have walked it well, but there is more yet to see." Before I could answer, the ground trembled violently. The light shattered, plunging the vault into darkness. The custodian's form flickered once, twice, then fractured like glass under pressure. The machine voice screamed through the vox. "Containment breach. Ascension protocol initiated," and above, somewhere far beyond the stone and ruin, the surface began to burn. The firestorm above reached us before the sound did. When the first tremor rolled through the deep stone, it came not as thunder, but as pressure a pulse that shuddered through the bones of the world. I stumbled, pressing a hand to the wall, and felt the vibration thrumming like a heartbeat. The hive was dying, collapsing under its own weight. And yet somewhere within that decay, something was still rising. I moved through the tunnels in darkness, guided only by the gold afterglow that lingered in my eyes from the vision. Every corridor looked the same: arched steel, cracked murals, devotional icons half swallowed by corrosion. Yet I could feel a pull, subtle but unrelenting, drawing me upward. The machine's voice had gone silent, but its absence felt intentional, like a parent watching quietly to see if the child remembers the way home. When I emerged into the mid-level ruins, the air hit like a blow. Smoke and dust churned together, thick as ashfall, and the stench of promethium hung heavy. Entire hab blocks had been sheared apart by orbital fire, their interiors spilling out into the streets like exposed organs. Above, the sky burned crimson. It wasn't sunset, it was the atmosphere itself. Aflame from the bombardment, I found a half-destroyed transport tunnel and followed it, climbing toward what had once been the Spire district. Along the way, I passed remnants of humanities. Last stand bodies lined in makeshift barricades, las guns melted into slag, purity seals fluttering like dying moths. Some still clutched rosaries, their fingers fused to the beads. I tried not to look, but each face seemed to turn toward me, eyes empty, mouths open as though mid-prayer. Then, faintly, the vox crackled again. Not static this time, but rhythm. A heartbeat. It was slower now, deeper. The tone was familiar, the same as the machine's pulse, the same rhythm I'd felt beneath the manufactorum. But now, it wasn't beneath me. It was above. I reached the spire's base by the time the second tremor struck. The structure leaned at a sickening angle, its once-proud pinnacles bent toward the burning clouds. What had once been a shrine to the Emperor's ascension was now a ruin, the colossal statue at its peak broken at the waist. Only the torso remained, one hand still raised in benediction, the other clutching nothing. I began to climb, the metal groaning beneath my weight. Every step scraped through layers of soot and prayer paint. Halfway up, the vox came alive, fully no longer whispers or distortion, but a voice, calm, steady, the same one that had called itself Terror. Leidenhall, you have carried the signal to its end. I froze. Who are you? We are what remains of the light, it said. The throne's reflection. The Emperor endures, but his echo fades. Through you, the circuit is complete. My heart hammered. The machine below it called itself a fragment of the throne. Was that you? Yes. But even fragments grow lonely. I didn't understand until I reached the top, where the storm tore open the sky. Through the crimson haze, I could see ships burning in orbit, their silhouettes swallowed by the glare of atmospheric fire. And then, beyond them, a single line of golden light stretching upward into the void, the Astronomicon blazing faintly through the warp's corruption. For the first time in my life, I realized it wasn't shining from Terra. It was shining toward it. And beneath that revelation, the voice spoke one final time, softer now, as if from a great distance. Every prayer is an offering of light. Every believer, a filament. You are all the throne's shadow. The wind at the summit was a living thing, a beast made of ash and heat. It clawed through the shattered spire, tugging at my armor straps and filling my mouth with the taste of iron. I could barely stand against it. But I forced myself higher, climbing until my hands touched the broken edge of the statue's base. From there, I could see the world laid bare beneath me. Hadrus Primus was no longer a hive, it was a scar. Entire sectors burned like dying coals, their skeletal structures collapsing into waves of smoke that rippled across the horizon. Above, the orbital bombardment had ceased, leaving a silence that felt louder than the war ever had. This is what faith builds, I whispered, and what it destroys. The vox pulsed again, light flickering against my chest like the heartbeat of a dying star. Faith is not the cause, the voice replied. Faith is the inheritance. You carry what was always yours. Lightning split the sky, jagged and gold, illuminating the ruins below. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement within the light shapes too immense to be human, shifting through the clouds like silhouettes of gods. Their outlines glowed faintly with the same hue that had filled the vaults below. The custodian's words returned to me. The Emperor does not need belief. He is belief. If that were true, then what I was seeing now wasn't imagination. It was faith made visible, manifest in the storm. The thoughts of billions, the dying prayers of worlds across the Imperium all converging here, burning through the warp like a plea flung into infinity. My vox hissed with interference, drowning the voice in static, but through the distortion I caught fragments, signal rising. Ascension. Initiate transmission. The words bled together, distorted by wind and distance. I knelt against the cold metal, shielding the device beneath my arm. Repeat that, I said. Who's transmitting? Not who, the voice answered. What? The statue beneath me began to vibrate, not from the storm, but from something deep inside the earth. The vibration traveled through the spire's length, up through my boots, into my bones. I heard the hum, the same harmonic pulse I'd felt beneath the manufactorum, amplified 1,000-fold. It wasn't just the machines anymore. It was the planet itself. The throne's shadow awakens, said the voice, now multiplied one tone, becoming 100, then 1,000. You stand at the point of convergence. I looked toward the horizon again. The golden beam that stretched into the void pulsed once, twice, then flared, blinding in its brilliance. I threw an arm across my face as heat rolled over the spire. My vox screamed with raw energy. The casing glowed faintly red. When the flare faded, I saw them points of light rising from the ruins below. Hundreds of them, streaming upward like souls escaping their shells. They joined the beam, merging with its radiance until sky and ground became one blinding pillar. What is this? I demanded. What's happening? The voice was almost tender now, distant but familiar. Faith distilled. Memory released. The throne does not only draw from life, it returns what it no longer needs. You have completed the cycle. I felt tears sting my eyes, though I didn't know if they were from heat or grief. Then it was all real, I said. Yes, the voice murmured, and none of it was. A crack of thunder tore the words away. The spire trembled beneath me. The ground below began to split, and for the first time, I saw what lay beneath the hive's heart. It was light, endless, golden light. The light below wasn't fire. It wasn't energy as any machine could produce. It was too fluid, too alive. It poured from the ruptured crust like blood from a wound, searing through the cracks of ferrocrete and the veins of what had once been the hive's foundations. It climbed upward in slow motion, each tendril coiling into the air like incense smoke made of gold. I felt its warmth before it reached me, not burning, but heavy, as if gravity itself had reversed, pulling every cell in my body toward it. I stared down from the shattered height, and for the first time since the siege began, I felt something beyond fear. Not hope, not faith. Something vast enough to swallow both. The entire city glowed from within, its ruins illuminated like the inside of a dying star. And from deep within that radiance, I heard the hum again, the machine's heartbeat, magnified until it was indistinguishable from the rhythm of my own. The throne's shadow, I murmured, barely aware I was speaking, double quotes. ... is cast by its own light. The voice finished for me. It was no longer coming from the vox. It was inside me now, speaking through thought, through blood, through whatever thin lines separated flesh from memory. I could see movement within the brilliance figures rising through it. Spectral outlines shaped like men but made entirely of light. Their armor bore no insignia, no color, only gold upon gold, like angels sculpted from sunlight. Some carried blades. Others carried banners that disintegrated as they rose. They weren't alive, yet they weren't ghosts either. They were something in between the residue of devotion, given form by the collective belief of the dying. Is this the Emperor's doing? I asked, though I already knew the answer could never satisfy. The Emperor is the doing, the voice said. He is not the flame, but the burning. Not the God, but the prayer. The words tore through me. I wanted to fall to my knees, but the spire shuddered violently beneath me. Chunks of stone sheared away, plunging into the storm below. The wind howled with a new force, and the radiant mist surged higher, wrapping around the spire's remains. I clung to the statue's base, every muscle screaming, but still I couldn't look away. The light was rising now, not as smoke or fire, but as structure rebuilding, reshaping. The broken hive was forming something vast, a cathedral of pure illumination stretching skyward, as if the world itself had decided to pray through the blinding glow. I saw the custodian Agenor, perhaps his memory. He stood upon nothing, suspended above the light, his blade pointed downward in silent benediction. His gaze met mine, and for a single instant the storm fell still. Faith built this Imperium, he said. Faith will bury it. The throne watches, and the shadow grows long. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely more than breath. He did not answer. Instead, the gold around him began to dissolve into motes, drifting into the wind. One by one, the luminous figures followed, each fragment ascending into the endless void until only the light remained. It grew brighter, hotter, until I could see nothing at all. When the radiance finally dimmed, the sky above was empty. No ships, no flame, only silence and the faint outline of the statue's hand still reaching toward heaven. I stood alone upon the spire, the vox dead, the city still. Yet somewhere beyond that stillness, beyond time itself, I could still feel it, the pulse of the throne, distant but unbroken. And I knew then that the Emperor had never needed to return. He had never left.